Hey guys, it's Max. We just got the new Galaxy S20 Ultra and we're very excited to test it out and not only get our first hands-on impressions, but also compare it to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which I've been using since launch. And this isn't going to be your typical comparison where we just talk about specs and read off of the website. We're going to look at some detailed things such as the display brightness and quality, speakers, even LTE speeds with the 5G here compared to Apple's best offering. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm gonna open up the box here and grab that first glance. Now I know this phone is massive and wow. Okay, so first impressions, this camera bump is huge. Not only, visually, but my finger just rests naturally right up here and it literally is just like pushing against the little edge there. Let me set it side by side with the iPhone. So Apple actually made theirs smaller this year, the camera bump. It doesn't stick out as much. And Samsung, they just went all the way. Now I get why Samsung is calling this the Ultra. This thing is massive, the camera bump is massive. And if you're somebody that doesn't like your phone to rock, well, Samsung doesn't care about this at all anymore. So if putting them side by side, surprisingly, the S20 Ultra feels very similar in weight to the iPhone 11 Pro Max. We'll put the weights right up there for you guys. Obviously, it is larger, as you guys can see, it's taller. But as far as the width here, not only is the Samsung's body thicker, but then when you add in the camera bump, it's a pretty big difference. Now, just like the Note 10, we don't have any buttons or switches here on the left-hand side, whereas the iPhone, you have your volume rocker, and then you have your physical silent switch, which I really like. And then on the other side here, the iPhone just has this power button, where here we have the volume rocker, and then we also have the power button. And I like this configuration where I can do everything with my right hand since I am right-handed. The iPhone has a lightning port, whereas the Samsung has USB Type-C, which I prefer. And with the Samsung, we only have a speaker grill on one side, but of course on the iPhone, this other side is just for looks. And let's finish off the exteriors with the backs. They're both made out of glass so that we can have wireless charging. The Samsung's is glossy, whereas the iPhone's is matte. Now, I like the feeling of the glossy just because it gives you nice grip, but the matte just feels more pleasant, more premium. And then, of course, we have our camera bumps, and it seems like these phone companies are now just trying to one-up each other. Instead of making small bumps and trying to make everything blend in, they're just going massive. So the iPhone made this design here, which looks really nice. You instantly know who has an iPhone 11. I really like how this looks, very premium. And then Samsung jumps in with this massive camera bump. It's almost like a Hummer, it's in your face compared to a nice Porsche, something like that. Now I will be switching over from the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which I've used since launch and I really like overall, to the S20 Ultra for at least a week, and then making a video showing you guys every single thing that I noticed, all the fine details of what it's like going over, all the good things and also all the bad things. So make sure you guys are subscribed so you guys don't miss out on that video. Now as this phone is setting up, let me talk about the chargers and batteries. Both come with USB-C chargers now, which is great. So the Samsung's is 25 watts compared to 18 watts with the iPhones. And as far as batteries, the iPhone has almost 4,000 milliamp hours, whereas the Samsung has 5,000, which is a massive number, but don't expect that you're gonna get better battery life, especially if you're gonna stay at that 120 hertz. And now it's time to set up our security. And the Samsung does have facial recognition, as you guys see, but it's just using a standard camera. It's not the ultra secure face unlock, Face ID that Apple has. So I'm gonna go instead with the fingerprint recognition, and just like the other phones, they actually have it underneath the display. No, don't download Microsoft Office, Excel, PowerPoint, none of that. None, LinkedIn, no thanks. I knew something's gonna happen if they're partnering with Microsoft. Now they have all their stuff on here. Let's see how these compare as far as unlocking your phone. Bam, we tap, pull up. Very quick. Apple's optimized this over time. I pretty much don't even notice it now that I got used to the iPhone. And then let's see if Samsung is optimized for their third version of the sensor. So I should be able to just put it in the right spot. There you go. That's surprisingly quick actually. And it's getting it each time. Now let's get into comparing the displays, and the first thing I want to test is that 120 hertz display. Now I love that on the iPad Pro, and I started flicking back and forth here and it seems like it's very close. So then I went into the settings, and out of the box, it's actually defaulted to not only 60 hertz, just your standard, but it's also defaulted to 1080p resolution. So right for this time, we can actually choose between 1080 at 120, or you can get the better quality, but I want to play around with that 120. Okay, there you go. There it is. So you guys are watching at 24 frames per second. Let us give you guys a slow motion shot right here. And you guys can see side by side, we have a lot more frames with the Samsung compared to the iPhone. So you see that smoothness difference when we slow it down. Not only do we have a higher refresh rate, but the animations are also quite a bit quicker on the Samsung. Now obviously we don't need extra frame rates to go through your icons faster, but where you really notice this 120 Hz is when you're scrolling through web pages. Everything looks super sharp and crisp. We're not getting motion blur, and then just doing simple things like opening up folders and programs, everything just feels so much more snappier. And once you get used to a 120 Hz screen, it's hard to go back to a 60 Hz. Now let's compare the full manual brightnesses of these phones. We're gonna use Google here, and as you guys can see, if we max out both of these, turn off auto brightness, the iPhone is actually quite a bit brighter, and the Samsung, if we close the browser and open it again, it starts out brighter and then dims, and that's actually a sort of a power saving feature, so it doesn't get too bright in manual mode. And if we open up the Verge and we have less white on the screen, it's about even. The iPhone's still slightly brighter, but it's very similar. However, if you're gonna go outside and you have auto brightness enabled, then they are very close. In fact, the Samsung might be just slightly brighter as long as you're in the auto mode. Now, as far as viewing angles, both of these look very, very similar. I see a little bit more reflections from the Samsung's display, but as far as brightness and contrast, I mean, they both look very good, and it makes sense because I'm pretty sure that Samsung makes the panel that's in the iPhone. And now let's compare the display quality when we're playing back HDR videos. I have two videos opened up right here, and it's very interesting that as soon as you play back HDR, the color balance of the Samsung S20 Ultra changes. It gets much warmer, and it's actually brighter. It allows that screen to get that full brightness compared to the iPhone here. Now, of course, we're not recording in HDR, so you guys aren't watching back in HDR. I had to turn that camera down so we can see the full brightness without blowing it out. And the first thing that pops out to me personally is how much brighter the whites and the highlights are on the Samsung. We didn't have as big of a difference with the Note 10, I don't believe. So either they tune the software or just the display is better than the previous ones, but it looks a little bit richer. And in HDR, the highlights are just so bright. You could definitely tell it's HDR, whereas the iPhone, it just looks like maybe slightly more dynamic range than a standard display. Now, I know the iPhone doesn't look bad. It definitely looks better than previous ones, but the Samsung is definitely one-upping it. And finally, with the displays, let's talk about those bezels. Now, the iPhone didn't look bad when it launched. Every day using it is totally fine, but when you put it side by side with the Samsung, you can clearly see how much thinner the bezels are, both on the top and bottom, and especially on the sides. Now, the iPhone screen does slightly curve just a little bit to make it more comfortable, and I'm really glad that with the S20s, they actually toned down the curve. And now something I'm excited for, comparing the speakers, and I do want to say that I am going to go in and enable Dolby Atmos because it does make it sound better. I have no idea why this is not enabled by default. It just does not make sense to me, but there it is. And we're going to go ahead and get started with the iPhone, and I'll cut between them. You guys let me know which one sounds better to you in the comment section below. Now we are recording with a nice microphone into a recorder, but there's lots of variables. It's compressed on YouTube. It depends on what you're listening through. But I will say that the Samsung is quite a bit louder. I actually tested it out with my Apple Watch, and it hit 3 decibels louder, which is a significant difference. Now, as far as sound quality in the mids and the highs, I'm very surprised by how close these are. And it's interesting to see these phones just one-upping each other after each new phone comes out. So loudness, definitely Samsung wins. The clarity, it's awesome, but there's also a difference in bass. With the iPhone 11 Pro Max, you actually feel a little bit of a thump there, where it sounds more like just like a sound of bass with the S20 Ultra. Wow, this feels laggy going back and opening this up. Not only this low animations, but my eyes got used to this 120 Hz very quickly. So now let's go ahead and test out the CPU and graphics performance. We do have the Snapdragon variant, and that is the 865 going against the A13 Bionic. Let's go ahead and test out the CPU. We have a multi-core score that is fairly similar. The iPhone is beating it by just a little bit, but with the single core, the iPhone has over 40% more performance in these tests. Now that is very surprising. Obviously, Apple's doing a great job with their processors, but I do have to note that in the real world, we have more than enough performance with both of these. RAM is one of the limiting things with the iPhone. We have 4 gigs of RAM, and with that, I do find that background apps will actually close on me at times, and it's really frustrating. Whereas with the S20 Ultra, we have 12 gigs of RAM on this particular model. Now, with the graphics test here, the numbers don't really line up, testing between Metal and say OpenCL or Vulkan. So we're actually gonna be doing a separate test where we're gonna be playing some games, seeing how it performs in the real world, and we'll give you guys some benchmark numbers there as well. So make sure you guys are subscribed. And now let's compare the internet speeds. I'm starting off with the iPhone, and I am on T-Mobile here. And inside, we have 3 out of 4 bars of LTE. Of course, the iPhone does not have 5G. And this is something I struggle with sometimes in certain areas. I have no reception or poor reception and speeds as well. So we'll see how the 5G works. Now with T-Mobile where we're at, we don't have the millimeter wave, but we do have the sub-6. So it's gonna be very interesting to see. So we got 9.7 megabit per second for both, which is not very good. And that is a pretty significant difference. So we're getting 57, 58, 59, 60 now. 5G, as you guys can see, 5 out of 5. And once again, this is the sub-6, which is better at penetrating through walls and buildings and stuff like that, which matters a lot. Now on the upload, interestingly, we're only getting about half of what we're getting on the iPhone, 5.4 compared to 9.7. So that is a pretty big difference if you care about your speeds, if you want to stream 1080, 60 FPS, HDR video, download things. And what I'm really interested about is in this next week that I'm going to be testing out the S20 Ultra, switching over in certain areas where I have no reception. I want to see if that's going to help a lot, and I will fill you guys in that video. So now let's finish off just talking about the prices. Now this phone comes in at $1,100. People were shocked when Apple started charging $1,000 for the iPhone 10. And with the S20 Ultra, Samsung is not being shy at all. $1,400 for this phone. That is crazy. It does have 128 gigs of storage compared to 64 over here. And for $200 more, you can go to 512, and I'll also get 16 gigs of RAM compared to $150 more on the iPhone, and that gets you to 256 gigs with the same amount of RAM. So this one is more expensive, but it does have some extra features, and especially the LTE, both sub-6 and 5 gigahertz, and of course a lot more cameras. Now you guys saw that we did not cover the cameras. That's going to be a way more detailed, bigger video. There's a lot to compare here, especially with the new additions. So make sure you guys are subscribed with notifications enabled if you guys want to see our very detailed camera comparison. This has been Max, and I will see you in the next video.